Assalamu alaikum, everyone. You are listening to episode 60 of the Muhammad Ghailan podcast with yours truly as the host. My apologies for this being a little bit later than I had hoped for. This past weekend has been quite a busy weekend. I just came off of recording a 3 day webinar, live webinar for Andalus Book Club, where I covered Islam and the Destiny of Man by Charles Guy Eaton, one of the most significant books, one of the most important books that I highly recommend to non-Muslims if they want to understand or are interested in Islam, interested in exploring Islam. Maybe for those Muslims who are looking to call people to Islam, I would say don't even recommend the Quran. Start off with this book because it sets the stage. He addresses so many different things that basically have somebody approach this whole tradition properly before, as a non-Muslim, before they can entertain looking at the Quran and the Hadith and all of these things. And he addresses many objections and biases, and it's such a good book. So anyways, the recordings for the Andalus Book Club members, the 3 video recordings, so each one was about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes, mashallah. 2 of them have already been uploaded. All of them are processed, but unfortunately, because of the length of the videos and the size of the files, I was only able to upload the first 2. The last session will be uploaded after the end of this week when it gets reset for me to be able to upload that session, inshallah. So that's going to be available in the Andalus Book Club videos section for the members. If you're not a member, consider it. You'll find a lot of videos covering books from last year, this year. Also, videos covering doubt and certainty, Imam al-Ghazali's Al-Muqidh min al-Dalal, consciousness. It's becoming a rich library of content there. So if you're interested in that and looking at answers where you bridge the gap between the tradition and modern issues and philosophical problems, that's kind of the goal, the end goal of the video section there and Andalus Book Club in general. The other thing was we recorded, alhamdulillah, it was a wonderful session with the Mad Mamluks. I was honored with another invite from the brothers there. They have a special place in my heart, especially for Sheikh Amir. I can't explain what it is, but I had a really good time with them. This was one of the longest podcasts that we did together. I think it was the 3rd or 4th one that we do together, and in it we talked about consciousness, certainty, belief, doubt, talked a little bit about Descartes, and then it just went on into a free-flowing conversation where we talked about all other kinds of subjects. It was fun. I was told that the episode is going to be dropped in the next few days, inshallah. So if you're not aware of the Mad Mamluks, I highly recommend you go listen to them. They're my favorite podcast, to the degree where I'm not exaggerating when I say that even if I'm listening to another podcast, I will pause whatever I'm listening to when an episode comes out from the Mad Mamluks and I listen to them before I resume my other podcast list. So highly recommend them. That episode, I'll share it on my Facebook page, inshallah, and Twitter by extension once I get the link for it. So that's that. What else? We just finished Ramadan. Just before I get into today's subject and the questions that I'm going to be covering, Ramadan just ended, may Allah, and a belated Eid Mubarak to all of you who fasted and celebrate Eid from the Muslim side. Just a couple of words of advice with regards to your Ramadan. May Allah accept, of course, your fasting, your prayers, your Quran recitation, all these things. Look at your state after Ramadan. Look at your daily habits and routines and practices and things that you engage in, and evaluate them in light of what you were doing before. Every Ramadan should be a time for you to reflect and reassess and incorporate something new into your daily habits and practices. So if you, number one, there should be a base kind of requirement. Every Muslim should have a relationship with the Quran all year long. You should not just open the Quran in Ramadan. So yeah, you do the khatam in Ramadan, but at least throughout the year, every day, at bare minimum, you have the time to recite 5 verses. Just go through half a page a day. But if you have time and you have the himmah, it requires a little bit of oomph from your side, a little bit of effort, a little bit of intention, deliberate, conscious intention on your end. Do a hizb or do a juz every day. Don't do the khatam just once a year. Do it every month if you can. And if you can't, then do it once every 2 months where you just recite 10 pages a day. That's 2 pages after every prayer, if you can afford that. or just do the 10 in the morning after you finish your subh prayer, or 10 in the evening after you finish Isha. And I highly recommend you do these things at the beginning of the day when you have the energy, because as the day goes on and you get to the end of the day, it's really difficult for you to actually get the wherewithal to sit down and do the recitations and things. So do it in the morning after subh prayer. That's when you have the energy, you have a bit of time, just get it done. And it doesn't have to be. And in addition to that, look into something else that you haven't been doing and do that. It could be as just maybe an additional prayer that you do, a sunnah, just a nafila that you perform. It could be, if your monthly budget, and this is a word of advice, if your monthly budget, no matter how rich or how poor you think you are, if your monthly budget does not include an element of charity, you got serious problems, because any money that you earn, there's always a right for the poor in it. So make sure that you dedicate a portion of and don't belittle how much. It could be as little as a single dollar. Whatever it is, you include in your monthly budget a charitable amount. If you can afford something like sponsoring an orphan, my God, you're so far ahead now. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Ana wa kafilul yatimi kahatain." Me and the one who sponsors an orphan are like those two. And he pointed to his index and his middle finger. In other words, in paradise. So you can look for a legitimate organization, by the way. As far as I know, I mean, in Australia here, there's Human Appeal. But I think Islamic Relief is also a good one. But research the organization, make sure that it's legitimate, make sure that the money is going to where they say that it's going to, and sponsor an orphan. It could be $40, $50 a month, whatever it is. If you can afford that, that's great. But definitely include some sort of a charitable amount. Look in your own locality. Can you find a family that maybe is in need of some sort? Ask your local imams. People that are active in the community know who's in need. So if you're not as active in the community, go find out. Is there anybody that's needing anything? Anybody's having some difficulties with their bills this month? And whatever you can, include an amount of charity in your money, in your monthly budget, if you haven't been doing that already. So that's like a thing that you can incorporate. And all of these things you do for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you're trying to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Attaining higher stations with Allah is not a passive process. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever comes to him walking, he will come to him, he will hasten to him jogging, in metaphorical language. You go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala an arm span, he will come to you a whole kilometer. Or a whole mile for the Americans listening. So definitely include some actions that you will see some benefit, and they have to go beyond you. You can turn your whole life into an act of worship. For example, your body has a right upon you. So you can, if you haven't been establishing or keeping good dietary habits, you haven't been active, you haven't been working out, you haven't been keeping fit, you can make that as a new intention and say, like, my body, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna li jasadika alayka haqqa," your body has a right upon you, and so because of that, I'm going to go and take care of myself and watch my diet and lower my sugar intake and stop eating processed foods and start working out and do these things, and for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to follow the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. So you do that, you can be rewarded, and it can become an act of worship for you. So that's positive, but it stays within you. You want to incorporate something now after Ramadan that goes beyond you. So include a charity amount, a charitable amount in your monthly budget. Include some sort of community service. So charity is not just money. It could also be time. So if you know that there are, let's say, refugees in the community, and you have the skill to teach English, or the skill to look at people's resumes and they want to get jobs and that, so you can donate your time. You're a professional. And you can help support the community with whatever skill set that you have. So you can dedicate some time to the community in that way. Anybody that's in need, by the way. And that's not just Muslims. I have to emphasize this. This is everybody. The Prophet ﷺ said, "إن أحب الناس إلى الله أنفعهم للناس." The most beloved of all people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who brings the most benefit to all people. So I can't emphasize this enough. Look at what you've been doing before Ramadan and look at what you're doing right now, and it should not be the same. You should be upping your game. Every year, you should be elevating your game plan. You should be on an upward trajectory, despite having ups and downs throughout the year, which is normal. We all have those. Your overall trajectory until next Ramadan should be going up. So that's that. And finally, we are in Shawwal. من صام Ramadan, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam said, whoever fasts Ramadan وتبعه بست من شوال, and follows it with 6 from Shawwal, 6 days of Shawwal, فكأنما صام الدهر جميعا. It's as if they fasted a whole year in one translation, or you can translate it as if they fasted a lifetime. So don't stop your fasting just with Ramadan. Find 6 days in Shawwal that you can do, commit to them, get them done. Highly, highly recommend you doing that. All right. Now, after this lengthy introduction, we get into the subject matter, the meat and the bones of what we are going to... Meat and the bones. This goes against the vegan article that I wrote. Let's get into the meat and the bones and the vegetables of what we are going to be talking about today, which is, this is an episode that is about you, listener interactions. This is the 4th one that I'm doing. Alhamdulillah. And as I've mentioned before, what I do with these is I go through Facebook messages, I go through contact form messages from andalusonline.org, and I take out questions that have more of a wide relevance. They keep repeating themselves. They have themes that are always recurring, and address them in these listener interactions, because it's better to spread the benefit to as many of you as possible. You know, some of you ask the question, but they're usually on many other minds. So if it's not too specific, I include it in these listener interactions. As before, those of you who requested to remain anonymous, I shall honor that request and I will keep you anonymous. Otherwise, your name shall be mentioned. Except in the case of a question that might have been a little bit too sensitive, and maybe you just neglected to ask to be anonymous, I will keep you anonymous in those senses. So I'll try to exercise my best judgment with that. But otherwise, I'm going to mention your name just so that you know that you've been, your question hasn't gone unaddressed, inshallah. Alrighty, so beginning with the first one, which is an anonymous figure. The initials are AM, by the way, just so that you know who you are. Your initials are AM. Assalamu alaikum. I really wanted to keep this question short, but there is no way around it, so I apologize in advance. I have questions about hijab, where I'm finding it hard to come to terms with it being fard. I hope you understand that this has nothing to do with my ego, or that I'm trying to follow my desires, inshallah, since I started wearing it a month ago, keeping in mind that since there is ijma' on it, I really don't have a say in the situation. And I'd rather wear it and find out it's not fard than the other way around, all for the sake of Allah, inshallah. Why I'm having trouble with it being fard? Surah An-Nur, ayah 30, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ. So this is a verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and say to the believing women, so the whole verse is وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ وَيَحْفَظْنَ فُرُوجَهُنَّ وَلَا يُبْدِينَ مِنْ زِينَتِهِنَّ وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا لِبُعُولَتِهِنَّ. And then it goes on to explain all the people that a woman doesn't have to wear the hijab in front of. And so the verse in translation for those who don't speak Arabic, and say to the believing women that they lower their gaze and guard their private parts and do not display their ornaments except what appears from them, and let them wear their head coverings over their bosoms and not display their ornaments except to their husbands or their fathers of their husbands, and so on and so forth. So that's the verse. The ayah, so the question continues, the ayah implies that khimar, so head covering, was something already worn by the women, and men for that matter. And that's because in the desert, the wind would carry with it the sand and ruin the hair, and the sun was too strong. So men and women covered their heads. So Allah is asking women to cover their chest area with the khimar that they already have on. He didn't ask them to remove it because they needed it. But does that mean they have to wear it if not needed? Chest area must be covered is what I understand from the ayah. And of course, dress in ihtisham, so modesty. Nothing short, tight, or transparent. Also, the Almighty says, وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا, in the same ayah, in the same verse. Doesn't this mean to say that we only show what can be shown, and what can be shown differs from culture to culture? since it's not explicitly mentioned. That doesn't mean we can wear shorts, for example, because that's fine in Western culture. Modesty still has its rules. It's just that hair that I'm finding it really hard to be a source of fitna, so a source of testing, tribulation, and especially that it's not precisely mentioned in the Quran. What amazes me also is that in this ayah, Allah specifically mentions who a woman can take off the hijab in front of one by one. She capitalized this. And He didn't mention especially to cover the hair. Second is the ayah in Surah Al-Ahzab. يُدْنِينَ عَلَيْهِنَّ مِنْ جَلَابِيبِهِنَّ ذَلِكَ أَدْنَىٰ أَن يُعْرَفْنَ فَلَا يُؤْذَيْنَ. So to lower their robes or their garments over themselves, that is better, that is closer for them to be recognized so that they're not harmed. From what I recall, this was in a specific context where women who didn't cover themselves meant that they were slaves and hence had the possibility of getting harassed. Hope you understand no quote-unquote reformation is intended. Would just like to know to ease my mind. Either way, I'm still keeping the hijab, inshallah. So sorry for the very long post again. Kind regards, AM. This is an interesting question because it comes from an interesting place. So the way I'm going to answer it is to address certain assumptions and presuppositions that you're making, first of all. Let's see. With regards to the hijab being fard, for the benefit of those of you who have questions about that, Surah An-Nur, for those who haven't memorized the Quran, Surah An-Nur begins with a verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, سورة أنزلناها وفرضناها وأنزلنا فيها آيات بينات لعلكم تذكرون. That this is a chapter in which we have descended, we have revealed, and we have made obligatory. And we have revealed in it clear verses so that you may be mindful. Just to repeat again, this is a surah, this is a chapter, أنزلناها وفرضناها, in which we have revealed and which we have made obligatory. In other words, every verse that you read in Surah An-Nur is a fard verse. It's an obligation. This is not an optional verse for you to apply or not apply. Secondly, فيه وأنزلنا فيها آيات بينات, and we have revealed in it clear verses. What's interesting about this is that we live in a time now where we make the clear ambiguous, and then we use that concocted ambiguity to justify not practicing, to justify casting doubts about something. I'm not saying that that's what you're doing here, by the way, for the questioner, but it's just as a general commentary. We all have to question ourselves. So that's, and we question everything. The other thing is we're so sure about our own selves, and we doubt everything else that comes to us from revelation. We're sure that our position is the valid position. We're sure that our conclusions are the valid conclusions, and we doubt what's coming to us, and then we create these ambiguities. This is actually Cartesian in its nature, which was something that we discussed in the Mad Mamluks episode recently, with regards to Descartes and the element of doubt. This is a modern thing, a modern phenomenon, that you are sure of yourself and you doubt everything that comes to you. The traditional position, and I don't mean traditional in the sense of just Muslims, I mean everybody, all of traditional societies, those who are people of knowledge who study these things, they'll tell you, they doubt themselves and they trust the revelation. We flip the script now. We doubt the revelation and we trust our own selves. Now, just to address certain points in specific in this question, you made the assumption that because it's the desert and the wind would carry with it the sand, this surah is a Medinan surah. The Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this surah, which is an obligation, and talked about the hijab in it, to the Muslims when they were living in a city, not in the desert. So that's something to also keep in mind. They were not worried about sand and dirt getting into their hair to the same degree as Bedouins. There is this assumption that when we talk about early Islam, as if they were all living in tents and just living within the elements all the time. Mecca was a city, Medina was a city, the Quran was revealed to people living in the city, and it also includes in it references that are applicable to both people in the city and in the desert. So that's one thing to address. The second one is that the verse assumes that they already have it on. If you look into the tafsir, where the scholars will tell you how women used to dress back then, they use it's an interesting way to phrase it. They say either, they say if they were wearing it, they just covered their bosoms, and if they, in other words, if they weren't, they would put it on. So some women had the hijab, had the head covering, others didn't necessarily have it on. All of them ended up covering their hair. And Aisha radiallahu anha, in commenting about this verse, and this is, by the way, as a side note, the Arabic was frozen in time with the Quran. So if you ever want to understand what the Arabic means, you don't go to modern people and their understandings and their conclusions about it. You have to go to the companions, to the early Muslims, because that Quran was revealed in that form of language, and it was frozen in time, and people study it to this day, and the meanings have been preserved. This is one of the miracles of the Quran in the Arabic language, is that all languages evolve and all languages take on different meanings and nuances and things, except for the Arabic language. Colloquially, yes, people have incorporated different languages into Arabic and they speak in their own dialects and such. But when it comes to Quranic Arabic, that is completely preserved. So if you want to know, you have to go back to the early people. Aisha radiallahu anha said about this verse, you want to know how to apply this verse? Look at how the women of Medina responded when this verse was revealed. She said they cut up their garments and they covered their hair and covered over their chest. So that's how they responded to this verse. If you're ever wondering about, is this the way to apply this verse, or is this a fard or is it not? So that's one thing. Based on these things, based on these meanings, and just a final point with regards to وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا, that they should cover whatever is to be covered and show only what can be shown. The way that you interpreted that, that we only show what can be shown. That's not what the verse is talking about. The verse is saying to not show except that which cannot be shown, to cover up and only show what cannot be avoided to be shown. The interpretation that the scholars offer here is, if a woman is walking, and just out of walking, the wind comes and hits her, and then something gets exposed. That's what that verse is talking about. You are not taking into account for the wind coming in and exposing, let's say, part of your leg, or exposing part of your hair to some degree. That's not what you're going to be taking into account for. The other one is women who are working. Let's say that you have to roll up your sleeves a little bit. So doctors, physicians, surgeons, you have to roll up a little bit and clean up and roll up your sleeves and expose these parts because of work that you're doing. So because of the difficulties entailed with regards to the work, you're also not taking into account for that. It doesn't mean that you get to just base on culture whatever you decide to show. So we live right now in a Western context, and women generally uncover their hair. By the way, we always like to talk about the assumptions being made by people in the past, and we pretend like we don't make our own assumptions in the present. There are assumptions being made by you in this question here, where you just assume kind of like a transcendent, timeless, that all women just in the West, that they don't cover their hair. This is a recent phenomenon, by the way. Uncovering the hair, for women especially, even in the West. It's a recent phenomenon. Historically speaking, all women covered their hair. This was just part of the dress code that people did. You have to look into the history of the fashion industry and how it evolved, and the standards of beauty and the standards of what is to be covered and uncovered. And just look at there's a TED Talk which was interesting, looking at the evolution of swimwear from early 20th century until now. You'd be shocked at how just the standards have changed, and what we take for granted today with regards to how people dress, people from even 100 years ago would be appalled by it. So you have to doubt your own self, doubt your own assumptions before you project those assumptions or understandings onto the past. With regards to the part where you say that you're finding it really hard for the hair to be a source of fitna, with all due respect, you might want to talk to a few brothers about this. Hair is an attractive thing for many men. They find it a turn on, some men more than so than others. It is an attractive feature of women. It is included as part of this ornament that is to be covered and has always been understood as such by all scholars. And that's the other thing, by the way. You want to know if something transcends a particular culture in Islam and it's based on the Arabic language. Scholars, as far east as you can go and as far west as you can go. Go all the way to India and go as far east as India and go as far west as Andalus. With all of the different in Africa, Asia, and Europe now, with all of the different cultural variations, we have scholars from all of these different spots of the world, all these geographical locations of the world, over a period of 1400 years. All of them agreed that what is included in the zina to be covered in this verse includes the hair of the woman. That tells you that it's not an issue of the desert and to not get your hair dirty. That tells you that it's something deeply rooted within the linguistic meaning of the verse itself. So that's why that's included in there. Women who are not wearing the hijab, this is not to cast judgment upon you all or anything like that. People have their own challenges and their own issues, but if you're wondering about the validity of this and the obligation of this, you should know that this is an obligation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you are not wearing the hijab, you're actually in a state of a perpetual sin when you exit your home. Let me repeat that. When you don't wear the hijab and you exit your home, you're in a state of perpetual sin because you're exposing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obligated upon you to cover up. The significance of this comes about in your lack of knowledge with regards to when you will pass away. You don't want to die in a state of sin. So I recommend, if you are not wearing the hijab, consider it at least. Try it out. I know it's difficult in this time and age. I know that there's some Islamophobia out there that might be, I honestly believe it's a little bit inflated to some degree, but women do face challenges. I implore the Muslim men, if you ever see a Muslim women wearing the hijab around you, keep a little bit of an eye out. Watch out for them, protect them, just in case some maniac comes around. You need to be the protector because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obligated you to be the protector as well. And that's a practice I do. The second I see Muslim women in hijab around me, my antennas go up. And I'm just keeping an eye out. Just in case something happens, I'll jump in there. So the women need to feel the safety and the security that when they see Muslim men, and Muslim men, grow your beards, man. Like, get your beard on and actually be recognized as a Muslim. So that when Muslim women see you, they feel that security that at least there's a brother around. If anything were to happen, I'm safe. And you need to take that responsibility upon yourself as a brother. Anyways, so that we're not talking too long about one question, I'm just going to move on to the next one. But I hope that this answers your question. I hope that gives you some peace of mind. Like you said, there has not been, just as a final note, the only difference in opinion that scholars have had about the hijab was with regards to the face and the hands. That is the only place where scholars have had lengthy discussions about should a woman cover her face or not. Some said yes, some said no. And so, word of advice, if you take the position of, I believe that this is the true opinion that I need to cover my face, mashallah, kudos to you. But you cannot condemn or look down upon sisters who do not cover their face, and vice versa. If you don't accept the position of covering the face, and you just cover and you just wear the hijab otherwise, you cannot look down upon other sisters, and both sides need to support each other in the ventures that they're going through, and everybody needs to pray for everybody for all the shortcomings that we're all guilty of. You cannot judge people for what they are wearing and not wearing. The fact is, none of us really knows what's in people's hearts. We don't know what they're struggling with. We don't know how they grew up. We don't know what kind of social conditioning and educational indoctrination that they've had. We don't know their base of knowledge. We don't know any of that stuff. So even if you see a sister that is not wearing the hijab, don't jump to conclusions and judge or any of that stuff. And you don't even have to speak to them about that. People are struggling with deeper issues than the hijab. They're struggling with just doubts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these manifestations of shortcomings, usually a byproduct, there's a hadith in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that a believer does not commit fornication while they are a believer. لا يزني المؤمن وهو مؤمن. A believer does not, لا يسرق المؤمن وهو مؤمن. A believer does not steal while they're a believer. In other words, when you engage in acts of sin, you're actually lacking in faith. while you're in that state. So whenever we have shortcomings, this is a manifestation of our own lack of faith because we have baggage, we have issues. And when you sin, you cover your heart, you have this you have this coverage, this rust that covers over your heart, and so it makes it more difficult for the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to penetrate it. So you have to engage in more istighfar, and you try, and we all struggle. This life is about a struggle. So don't judge each other in that sense. But now we're talking about what is the ruling and what is the reality of the situation. Out of fairness for everybody, we need to be very clear about what is taking place. So when I say that when you are not wearing the hijab and you are exiting your home in a state of a Muslim woman in a state of not wearing the hijab, showing off her hair, not covering up properly, you need to know, just out of fairness to you, I'm telling you this, and out of love for you, I'm telling you this, you need to know that you're in a state of perpetual sin as you do that. Every time a man looks at you and sees things that you're supposed to be covering, that is a sin upon you. Yeah, they're supposed to be good, lowering their gaze and all that, but we're talking about individual responsibility, and we can't sugarcoat that, and we can't make it, and we can't muddy it. It has to be very clear. Kamila Salimi. Salam, I wanted your thoughts on something that I've been running into. I've noticed a trend where I see post reflections by Muslim scholars and students that are way too black and white, even the ones that imply complexity. I feel ignore what it meant to be. I feel they ignore what it means to be human. Just missed a word there. Which is, we make mistakes. We are flawed and imperfect by nature. I'm a therapist for a living, and from my work, I've learned that it's not just about knowing what is good or bad and following through with it. Life is more complex than that. There are people that live with symptoms of trauma, that are highly sensitive, that have addictions. Posts that are shaming, black and white, and don't acknowledge humanity and vulnerability can actually re-traumatize people. SubhanAllah, this I didn't even, by the way guys, I chose these questions over time and I forget what I add into this document, and I'm shocked that I'm reading this question right after I just gave the response to the previous one. Anyways. Life is more complex than that. There are people that live with symptoms of trauma that are highly sensitive. They have addictions. Posts that are shaming, black and white, and don't acknowledge humanity and vulnerability can actually re-traumatize people. It feels like sometimes scholars live in their own bubbles, almost as if they don't remember what it's like to be human and have the constant inner struggle. I know that the fact that they are human means that they struggle and have their own issues, but I feel like we don't ever discuss that. As a community, we don't seem to value vulnerability. We don't make enough excuses for people and don't always put ourselves in other people's shoes. We oversimplify this. We oversimplify life, paint it as black and white. The implications of this is terrifying. There's not really a question here. It's just a commentary, which is a very good commentary from Camila. You're right. The way that, one of the things that we discussed in the Mad Mamluks was with regards to a convert who wants to pray for their parents after they pass away. We can talk about the black and white, like rulings from the Islamic tradition, all that, but man, you got to recognize the humanity of people, the emotional state that people are in. The fact is, you don't know what's in the hearts of this person's parents. They didn't accept Islam. Okay, fine. They didn't accept it. But why? You don't know what the reasons are. You don't know what they know. You don't know how they were conditioned. You don't know the social situation that they were in, the exposure that they've had with regards to the religion. We can make all kinds of claims about it, but we need to know something, that we don't know the states of specific individuals afterwards in the Day of Judgment, except for those who are mentioned to us by name explicitly, either in the Quran or in the Hadith and Mutawatir, where there's no doubt about where they're going to end up. But beyond that, you don't know. And yeah, I can give you the ruling, like, oh yeah, the scholars say, that based on this hadith and this ayah, like, you cannot pray for them. But sometimes you just gotta let people be, and just, they want to pray. They have high opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't know what their situation of their parents are. It's not the end of the world. Just let them be. So people have a human being is not it's not like artificial intelligence. Completely just calculations, find out the right answer, binary code, 0 and 1, and just give me this, and that's it. So I try as best as I can, because alhamdulillah, I've been blessed with the opportunity to travel to different parts of the world, interact with all different kinds of people, be exposed to so many different situations and contexts. And I try as best as I can to listen. Oftentimes, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You have a set of teeth and a set of lips to keep your tongue behind, 2 gates. So, in other words, two gates to keep your tongue shut behind, and so think twice before you speak, and two ears and one mouth. So, speak or listen twice as much as you speak. So I try as best as I can to listen to people and where they're coming from. And yes, there are certain times where you have to state a fact as such because just out of fairness to the individual, they need to know without ambiguity, this is the answer. Now, how they apply that answer, what that means for their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their relationship with Islam and their ritualistic practices and all of these things, that is another ballgame. That's another story. All of us, every single one of us, knows that we should be doing certain things and we're not doing them. And all of us know that, each one of us knows that there are certain things we should not be doing, yet we're doing. It's just a fact of, this is human existence. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us what the solution is. Seek istighfar. Ask Allah for forgiveness. And he, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, al-Habib, mashallah, it's amazing. The beloved, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, just tells us exactly what's our state. Kullu bani Adam khata'. Every single one of us, of the children of Adam, is not just a sinner, but like a perpetually always sinning all the time. We're just continuously sinning. وَخَيْرُ الْخَطَّائِينَ التَّوَّابُونَ. And the best of those who make much sin are those who seek forgiveness. And there are conditions to the tawbah, of course, where you have to seek forgiveness. You abandon the thing that you were doing. You try to set things straight. And if you fall, you get up again and you ask Allah for forgiveness. And that's just the nature of your existence here. Those of you who, I don't know if I'm honored by anybody who's from the scholarly community that listens to this, I implore you to keep in mind these words from Camila. Sometimes we fall into, as the more that we bury ourselves in books and in rulings, the more hard-hearted we tend to become, and the more like we're almost like automatons. We just want to relate the ruling and that's it. And however it manifests in your life, I don't really care. I've told you, and it's almost like I've relieved myself from the responsibility by telling you, and that's not the case. Adnan Bey, Assalamu alaikum. Kaif halak, brother? I wanted to ask, how is culture related to Islam? So how much of a culture can we follow as a Muslim? Is it Islamic only to follow, let's just say, Saudi culture or Arab culture? I hope you answered my question. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot from the podcast. Al-urf muhakkam, so in usul, culture, custom, they are used as a source of rulings in Islam. That's not to say that you're going to negate to negate rulings that are clearly transcendent above culture, but culture has a role to play. There is a really wonderful paper by Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah that I recommend you read it. Islam and the Cultural Imperative is the title of it. It's available in PDF. There's also an article that I'll be putting out on andalus.online.org with regards to the role of culture as well, where I draw quite a bit from Dr. Umar's paper as well as from other articles and books talking about this. But if you want to practice Saudi culture and you feel connected to them and you love Saudis, mashallah, go for it, enjoy. But you cannot call that Islamic culture per se. Islam is a religion of principles and ideals. How these principles and ideals manifest in the specific forms that they have, now you have different cultures that manifest it. And so you can call, if you travel to Malaysia and go to Saudi Arabia and go to Sudan and go to Nigeria and Ghana, like to Muslims there, you will find different manifestations of these Islamic ideals. But if you try to take away the dressing and look at the essence, you'll find the same essence coming about. So an example, now that we talked about the hijab, an example is a hijab for, women in Malaysia versus women in Sudan, for example, wearing the hijab. You will see different ways of how that hijab is manifesting itself, and versus women in Saudi Arabia. The hijab is manifested in a different way. That has to do with culture. You can't say that the way that Muslims, women in Saudi Arabia dress is the proper hijab, because that is just one form of how it manifests itself. You have women in North America, for example, and in the West in general. How did they wear the hijab? They have different ways of putting on. The women that like to cover their hair in a turban formula, versus women that just like to do the tarha, or however they want to do it. It's up to them. As long as that's why in the hijab, if you look at the rulings for hijab, the scholars talk about the principles of the hijab rather than the specific form and color of how it should be. So that's how you would look at culture. But if you want more detailed answer to this, go read Dr. Umar Farouk Abdullah's Islam and the Cultural Imperative, and look out on andalusonline.org for the culture paper that I'm going to be putting out soon, inshallah. It's almost done. It's just a final draft right now, just doing some edits. Amina J. Salam. How does one overcome emotional pain? The Islamic way. Whenever I make an effort to change, there's always something that holds me back from achieving my goals. Emotional pain is, well, the Islamic way is number one, stay away from intoxicants. You can't drown your sorrows in alcohol and gin and tonic or whatever. So the way that you do it is just, if you have emotional pain, you have to recognize that time is what is required for emotional pain to be treated. It is something that you're going to have, and time doesn't erase it. It heals all wounds, but scars will be there. And so the way that you would take, what you take from emotional pain are the lessons that you are supposed to learn from it. And recognize that oftentimes the emotional pain that we experience, and the way that you describe it here, I'm assuming it has to do something to do with a relationship or with the loss of something or whatever. Somebody did you wrong. Oftentimes these happen as a reminder to us that we've attached to ourselves to this perishing nature of the world in ways that we shouldn't have. That is not to say that you should not have attachments in the world to people and loved ones and whatnot, but to just recognize that at times they can be problematic. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us. He was feeling emotional pain when his son Ibrahim, for example, passed away. But what does he say? Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. إن القلب لا يحزن. The heart feels sorrow. The heart feels sadness. والعين لا تدمع. And the eye will shed tear. ولا نقول إلا ما يرضي ربنا. But we will not utter with our tongue except what will be pleasing to our Lord. وإنا لفراقك يا إبراهيم لمحزونون. And certainly for separating from you, O Ibrahim, we're feeling sad. So the other thing that you recognize is that whatever it is that you lost or whatever it is that caused you pain in this world, at the end of the day, this world is a limited temporal existence. This is less real than the akhirah. And so you're just experiencing a transient thing right now. And so the way that you would deal with it Islamically is to just reconnect yourself with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reconnect yourself with the Quran, make much remembrance and dhikr. Now, this is not to ignore real depression, by the way. Some people, emotional pain could entail depression and depressive symptoms as a real medical condition. And in that case, I would recommend you go to a psychiatrist. You would go to a mental health professional and actually get the treatment. That's if you have that situation. But if you're just an average person who's just feeling emotional pain for whatever life event that happened to you, these are reminders. You know, the dunya, as Sheikh Hamza, there was a clip that was shared a while back. Sheikh Hamza says that, Hamza Yusuf said that the dunya is designed in a way to break your heart if you attach your heart to it. So that's just a reminder of that. That's not to say that you become cold-hearted, that you withdraw from people. That is not what we're saying here. Just as a reminder, go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your ultimate attachment is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's okay for you to have attachments in this world, but remember that it's all perishing and your ultimate abode, إِنَّ الْآخِرَةَ لَهِيَ الْحَيَوَانِ. That the ultimate abode, the real life, where you will not experience any of this pain, is going to be in the hereafter, the final day, inshallah. Maryam, I have an inquiry which I would like to explain further on. I've heard from some people that there is no such thing as a true atheist. Could you elaborate on that statement further? Like, is it even possible for a true atheist to be moral and yet disbelieve in God, the afterlife, and the conscious? The reason there is no true, quote unquote, true atheist is because if you push this question as far as you can, you will find that ultimately they will tell you, I don't actually know for sure that God doesn't exist because I have not investigated every single thing in existence and I don't know for sure. It's just that 99% I'm not, So in that sense, there's no true atheist, one who really actively, positively says there definitely is no God. If you push atheists, and I've done this with numerous people before, if you ask the questions properly and try to tease out what is it really that you believe, you'll find ultimately it's just a lack of conviction but not true knowledge. So that's what it means to say there is no true atheist. And so the key here for me, whenever I speak to atheists, is just get them to just admit you're agnostic and leave the door open and humble yourself. That if you're wrong, that you might be wrong, and if you're wrong, that if you're presented with truth, leave yourself room to accept the truth. Don't be so arrogant to reject the possibility so offhanded and pretend that you have total omniscience to the degree that you know that there is no such thing. Can a true atheist be immoral and yet disbelieve? Yeah, they can. Morality is not contingent upon belief or disbelief. When we say that one can't be moral as an atheist, we're talking about their ability um, uh, to have a foundation for that belief, to anchor that belief onto something transcendent and absolute. So for atheists, and this is a point that I made in a debate that I had last year. It wasn't really a debate; it was a discussion with Peter Slizak at the University of UNSW, New South Wales, in Sydney. And the point that we made was, without God, the only philosophical thing that you have in front of you to anchor your morality on is utilitarianism. Let's maximize pleasure and reduce pain and displeasure. The question now becomes is, well, who defines what pleasure is? It's a very dangerous line of inquiry when you go into utilitarianism, because it's moving and it's pragmatic, and it's just and it depends on, and that's where power games come in, by the way. Who decides which pleasure is most valuable to enforce upon the masses is the one with the most power, and that's where postmodernism comes in now. So it's all really a foundation of atheism. So in that sense, you can't be moral because there's nothing transcendent to call it moral. It just becomes what is facilitating my pleasure right now and what is not. And so that's the approach that they have. But beyond that, can you be a good person is a question that you're probably asking. Can you be a good person and still be an atheist? Yeah, you can. فطرة الناس التي فطرة الله التي خلق الناس عليها لا تبديل لخلق الله. This is the fitra, this is the original state of goodness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created people upon, and there is no changing of the fitra. We have innate within us, it's imprinted in our hearts, that the moral good is imprinted in our hearts. So we do things intuitively because they are good. The question after that then is, well, why? Why is it good? What tells you it's good? Why can't you do the opposite thing? If it's going to get you further to your own personal goals, even if it results in the harm of millions of people. As an atheist, you would not have an answer. You just say, we're just trying to maximize benefit for people. Well, how do you know that it is truly a benefit for people? Who tells you that? Where did you get that omniscience from? So that's what that point is, Maryam. Anonymous. Assalamu alaikum. My question is regarding the topic living with a purpose. Me and my husband, we both come from Spacetoon and Age of Empires generation. In other words, Japanese anime and video game fans. Oh man, this is Sim must be, if you're listening to this, you're just excited. I've listened to your episode Living with Purpose, and I find it hard to apply what you've said in some life and work fields like art, filmmaking, and other entertaining fields. I'm a graphic designer, and my husband is a digital artist. He designs and draws environments, characters, and vehicles for video games, films, and ads. Since he was 19, this was his dream, and he worked so hard to develop himself in it. It's almost his only passion and what makes him happy. So I find it difficult to think about this as something that serves the ummah or can develop our relation with Allah in any way. Moreover, during his study, he had to attend anatomy drawing classes and life draw male and female fully naked models. Of course, none of us like this, but he had to do it in order to get the degree. Now I'm starting to ask myself, what if this whole field is not for Muslims? In the end, even if he only created backgrounds of a film, there's a big chance that it's going to contain sexual scenes or inappropriate speech. But what if this is the only door that was opened for him? Why does it have to be of a benefit for the ummah or has a deep significant meaning? Can't we just do what makes us happy if it's not directly haram? Does everything we do has to be for our akhirah? Can't we work for both dunya and akhirah? Where's the line between halal entertainment and haram one? Almost all films and movies contain at least one sexual or inappropriate female scene. Cartoons being no exception. So whether it's consuming or helping in the creation of these dunya things, I would love to hear your ideas on it. For me, living a completely aware life and thinking about Allah in every big and small thing is very tiring and mentally consuming. My husband is more relaxed about these things and he seems more balanced and happy to me. I'm confused. Hope you can help me. Thank you. Um, well, there was a statement that Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad made recently at the Revival of the Islamic Spirit Knowledge Retreat 2017 in Toronto. And he said that he was speaking about art, the role of art and culture in Muslim civilization. And he said that part of the reason why Muslims are in the state that we're in today of lack of imagination, lack of cultural awareness is because we've actually abandoned art, an artful expression and poetry. And that actually limits our imaginative powers. And historically speaking, if you look at Islamic art, there are multiple books written on this. It was a very rich tradition. And it was not just about calligraphy. There's designs of all kinds. The things that we stayed away from and you find in Islamic, strictly Islamic art, at least from the Sunni perspective, is the lack of human figures and things that would be idealized in that sense. But that was more applicable to sacred spaces, though. The way that you can make your life towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you don't have to think about it all the time like that, by the way. He sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the companions came and complained to him. They said that when we're with you, we're in this hyper state of awareness about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about the akhirah and such. But then we go to our families, and then we spend time with our wives and children, and we forget about these things. And so our state, we feel it goes down. And they were complaining about this. He sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, had you been with me all the time like that, in the rest of, as you are with me, the angels would shake hands with you in the streets. Now, that is not the state of the human being. You're not designed that way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not create you to be like that. It's okay for you to engage in activities that are they appear to on the outward nature of it, that this seems to be about dunya. But what is it about intention? You start off with your intention at the beginning. And you say, oh Allah, I'm doing this for your sake. I'm doing this to be a better Muslim, to be a representative. Even your presence in this work environment. Allah did not create you to make space tunes. Allah did not create you to be an engineer. Allah did not create you to be a doctor. That is not your ultimate purpose in life. Your ultimate purpose in life is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be a Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be Khalifatullah ala al-ard, to be a representative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the planet. Allah did not create you to live in America, or to live in Australia, or to live in Canada. Everything that you do is you have to reflect on, all right, so Allah put me in this place for a purpose. It could be as little as just through your own conduct and behavior, that you act right, you behave in an appropriate manner, you represent Islamic ideals. Just from your behavior alone, your presence could be the reason why someone becomes guided. And so it turns out that, you're working in these entertainment kind of design industries, and you're doing these things, and you're earning a living. What is the purpose of you earning a living? To provide for your family. All right, so that's in a way fulfilling an Islamic purpose. You're meeting your responsibilities. You're putting food on the table. So the question then is, okay, well, I'm engaged in certain things that are, how do I make this maybe have a greater purpose than just putting food on the table and providing for my own family, which is an act of worship, by the way. You're providing sustenance for your family. But you want to take it to the next level, and you want to make it, I want to serve the whole ummah now with this. You guys are in an industry that I think Muslims are finally starting to produce things using these professions that will inspire people. The example, which everybody, is no secret, I'm a huge fan of Dirlish or Turul. Qiyamat or Tughrul, Resurrection or Tughrul. If you haven't watched it, you're missing out. Go check out Netflix or web links or whatever it is. Look up Resurrection or Tughrul. 4 seasons. Yeah, each episode is 2 hours long, but they're so well executed, and they transmit lessons and ideals and principles and things that it's inspiring children even. It is teaching people how to make proper dua. And pay no attention to any of those who are having issues with regards to the historical authenticity of this. They're missing the greater point behind the show. So we need more shows like that. If you are in this type of industry and you want to see how can I serve the ummah, you don't even have to quit your job and do that. You can do that on the side. This is how you can use these skills to serve Islam, to serve the ummah. Um, Dunya, by the way, there's a difference between alam and dunya. Alam is this thing that we live in existence. Dunya is the aspect of it that makes you forget and fall into a state of heedlessness and think that you're going to live forever, that there is not going to be a final abode. Does everything you do have to be about the akhirah? Everything you do is about the akhirah, because everything you do is being recorded. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that nothing, even an atom's weight, is not going to be missed. Everything is being recorded, and you're going to be shown your whole life in the akhirah and then judged accordingly. So everything you do is already about the akhirah. The question that you have to ask yourself is, okay, well, how do I direct it in a way that is going to benefit me in the akhirah? Because it's happening. The akhirah is happening. It's real. And heaven is real. And hell is real. And the sirat is real. These things are not allegories. They're not metaphors. These are actual things that we will all come out of our graves and we will witness it. And we will be shown a record of all of our actions. So it's not so much about, do I have to make it about the akhirah? It is already about the akhirah. So now you got to ask yourself, okay, well, I need to concern myself with making sure that what I do is going to benefit me in the akhirah, not harm me in the akhirah. That's the question that you have to deal with and contend with. So you live a balanced life. You recognize throughout your activities and things that you're doing that you can serve. Be creative. If you're in design, you should be the last person to ask me about how can I use this to serve the ummah. You are the most creative subpopulation amongst Muslims. Think outside the box. There was a question that was asked when I was doing the MCAT prep for medical school. And the question was, here's a candle, a wax candle, and here is a box of matches. Light the candle and hang it against the wall horizontally, and do it in a way where it does not drip on the ground. Most people struggle with this question. Like, how do I hang? Okay, so I have the matches, I can light it, but how do I hang it? I can melt the wax on the wall, and then I can hang it, but then it will start to drip because it's a wax candle. It will start to drip on the floor. How do I do it? Few people are able to think outside the box and think, wait a minute, this box of matches is not serving just as a container for the matches. I can also use it as a shelf. So I can light the candle and pour some of the melted wax on the side of the box, hang the box on the wall, and then put the candle on top of the box. And so now I have a candle that is sitting on a shelf. So that's thinking outside. That's creativity, thinking outside the box. You guys are the most creative ones. You can think about it in a way like that and not overburden yourself with an obsessive compulsive type of desire to figure out like every single thing that you do. Look at it this way. You are on a trajectory and you are elevating through time. Start off small. Take one thing that you're doing and figure out a way that you can employ it in the service of being a representative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it could, like I said, it could just be as little as be a good Muslim. Just be a good representative in your workplace. And don't feel like my work has no purpose, because if it's about putting food on the table, taking care of your family, and doing that's an act of worship. You are actually in a state of, believe it or not, you're in a state of jihad when you do that. When you're taking care of your family and earning a living so that you can feed your children and all of that. So just relax. It's not that big of a deal. With regards to having to do things that you're not taking into account, unless let's say that you are being told that you need to do designs or you're in a work environment where all of your work is directed towards creating designs for pornography. Well, I'm sorry, better to go hungry than to work in that industry. You're not obligated. You can think again outside of the box. You're a creative person. We are moving more and more nowadays towards self-employment, becoming a consultant, doing contract work, and you can pick and choose where you can direct your efforts. But you're not going to be taken into account for the eventual use of your products if it happens to find its way towards impermissible things that people are doing. and you didn't intend that from your own accord. You just got commissioned to do a particular thing, and in itself it was not impermissible, and you didn't think that it was going to serve an impermissible end. You're not going to be taken into account for what other people do. So just be selective with what you get involved in. Um, Drawing the anatomy and things, I'm not gonna comment on that. I mean, it's there's certain things that people end up exposed to. I mean, even now in medicine, um, we have what's called intimate examinations and things that we're going to have to do as practice. It's not even real like patients. There are going to be actors and actresses that are going to be coming to the presenting themselves in our tutorials this coming semester, and we're going to be doing some really intimate examinations. But that's part of the training of it. I'm not going to comment with regards to the drawing and stuff. You can everybody seek a fatwa from your heart, whatever you feel comfortable with. I'm not going to put my neck on the line for it. I hope that's okay, but just something for you to reflect on. Anyways, Abdurrahman, Abdullahi. I'm sorry, guys, that I'm running through these a little bit quicker than I would like to, but I want to cover as many of them as possible. Abdurrahman, Abdullahi, a couple of questions for you that can hopefully answer in a future podcast. One, can you reveal your sin to someone if it is going to be a problem that you continue to struggle? In this scenario, is it allowed to break with the Prophet's hadith on this matter in order to reach a greater benefit? So just to answer this first question, uh, all of my ummah, the Prophet ﷺ said, Mu'afa illa al-mujahir. All of us are going to be forgiven, and we're going to be given excuses, basically, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us the benefit of the doubt, except for the one who um, declares their sin openly. And the reason for that is when you declare your sin openly, you normalize it. You remove from yourself the psychological burden of shame that you should have with regards to the sin that you're committing. And so you should be struggling to remove this sin, and you should be making tawbah, and you should be asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help you in that manner. And if you need help, if it's some sort of addiction of some kind, go seek help. But you don't need to expose that to somebody unless it's, let's say, an intimate, like a spouse, where this thing is going to interfere with your relationship in some sort of way. You let them know to the degree that you are working on this, and you ask for their help. Not for the sake of normalizing, and I'm just gonna, this is what I have and this is what I am and I can't help it, but for the sake of looking for help. Second question, is there such a thing as multiplicity of intentions and or sincerity of intention? My messed up westernized understanding of niyyah is that you can make niyyah for multiple things, but it is always better to do it for the sake of Allah. This brings me to another question. What exactly does it mean to do it for the sake of Allah? I do things because Allah and His Messenger ﷺ commanded me. But I ultimately do it for my own self-purpose, hoping to gain rewards, benefit in this world and the hereafter. Is there anything wrong with my likely warped understanding of what sincere niyyah is? My goal is to live my entire life and have every action count as a reward for me. Inshallah, I want everything I do, school, work, relationships with others, extracurricular activities, etc., to be for the benefit of me on the Day of Judgment. How can this be attained? And then how do we know the intention is sincere? You've alluded before answers to my final question, but please elaborate on that one in particular. Jazakallahu min kulli khair. What I would say about intention is Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, in his commentary on the hadith of intentions, he says that people do things in Islam for three reasons. The first one is they do it, and there are three types of worshippers, if you will. Three types of worship. The first one is ibadatul tujjar. This is the worship of the merchants. And in this one, you are doing things for reward. You're calculating. Everything you do, you're looking for, all right, so Allah said He will reward with this and He will reward with that, and I'm giving charity because it will increase me in this and that. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that in the Quran. And so you can't say that this is bad. It's a method that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses in the Quran to entice certain types of personalities. There is a type of personality that inclines more towards committing actions for the sake of benefit. The second type of worship that Imam al-Nawawi mentions is ibadatul abid. This is the worship of the slaves. And that type of worship is out of fear of punishment. And so you find in the Quran as well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns of grave punishment for people who commit this type of sin or that type of other sin. And so because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning these things, there is a type of personality, this is the second type of personality, that abstains from action and commits action out of fear of punishment. The last type that Imam al-Nawawi mentions is ibadatul ahrar, the worship of the free people. And those people do things for purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's at the forefront? And we're not talking here that you don't have a desire for reward or don't have fear of punishment. It's just that what is these types of worship are about what is the most prominent thing in your mind? What is at the forefront of your mind when you commit an action or abstain from an action? Is it because you are seeking reward, or is it because you are fearful of punishment, or are you doing it just because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said so and He is deserving of that type of obedience from you? If you do it for the third reason, that is what he called free people. Free in the sense of they're free from desire of reward, punishment, attaining this or that. They're doing it because they believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worthy of that. Now these are stations, by the way. You can begin at the station of fear and graduate to the station of freedom. Similarly, you can begin at the station of reward, seeking reward, and graduate to the state of freedom, the station of freedom. And that freedom comes about after years of working on yourself, years of worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, years of polishing your heart and detaching your heart from the dunya. And eventually you find yourself graduating to this level of, mashallah, I just want Allah's pleasure. And that's what brings you joy. Now, you can do things for multiple intentions. That's fine. You can you can go to the gym because there is a right upon your body. You could watch your dietary habits because your body has a right upon you, and you want to make sure that you take care of it because it is a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. While at the same time, it makes you feel good that you're strong and you're feeling and you look good, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem becomes when you do it because you want praise from people. So you seek knowledge, for example. You can seek knowledge for the sake of yourself, for the sake of teaching people, for the sake of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of these are fine. These are multiple intentions. The problematic intention comes about when, for the sake of I want people to look at me as a scholar. Now that's a problematic intention because you are now elevating people and you're looking for praise from people. And so the only praise you should be seeking is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can have all of your life directed towards Allah if you just have this initial intention of, oh Allah, just make me, and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We oftentimes we ignore or we don't pay attention to our own agency in the sense of seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seeking Allah's facilitation. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make you sincere. Always. Ask Allah every day, after you pray. Just ask for sincerity. And Allah will make you sincere. Out of that, the continuous examination of your intentions and reflection over your behavior, you eventually will become sincere that way. And when should you worry? Is when you no longer worry about being a hypocrite. As long as you're worried about and having doubt about your sincerity, that the Prophet ﷺ says that is a sign of your sincerity. It's when you're doubting it. Once you forget about that and you're absolutely certain and there is no doubt whatsoever in your own self, that is when you should fear that you have become a hypocrite. So you should always be in a state of doubt about that. Let's see if there's anything else that. I hope that answers your question, Abdurrahman, to some degree. Shibli Rahman, Assalamu alaikum, Ustad. Would you advise people to attempt reading multiple subjects at one time, or would it be advisable to focus on one particular subject before moving on to the next? Can you please write a short post on how to go about either schedule? I would say you could, the way the schooling system works is you doing multiple subjects at a time, as long as you just divide your schedule accordingly. So take a lesson from your schooling background and just divide your schedule. I wouldn't do too much at one time. Everybody has different capacities for what they can handle. I think the best thing to do is to reflect on what is your goal, your end goal? What is it that your primary thing that you're trying to achieve? Look at the things that you're reading right now and limit the subjects that you read at a time so that they can pour into fulfilling that goal. Personally, I can tell you for myself, you can find me maybe having 2-3 books running at a time. I'll read them, separately. Obviously, I'm not reading all three at the same time, but three books, or two, three books running at a time, and I'll give an allotted time to each one. It gives my brain a break as well. I like just to read one thing all the time. Sometimes can get a little bit daunting and boring for me, so I'll read it for a period of time, shut it down, go to the next thing. It keeps my mind fresh that way. Aside from, of course, having to do all the other reading that I need to do for medical school. So I'm able to organize all of these things, and I can't give you my schedule because I don't know what your schedule is like. I don't know what your commitments are like. I don't know what you have going on in your life. You know yourself best. I highly recommend that you do write a schedule down if you're not disciplined enough and haven't formed a habit yet. If you have a habit formed with that, you don't need it as much. But if you're still in the stages of establishing habits, write down a schedule and stick to it. And do a schedule that you know you can handle, that is not going to overwhelm you. And recognize that you're in it for the long haul. Don't try to get things done tomorrow. Enjoy the process itself. Don't focus on the end game. Focus on the process of playing the game itself. So, Nidba, I think is how you Ndiba. Daji. I wish I could pronounce your name. Assalamu alaikum. I pray you are well. Thank you for your work. I wanted to ask, what is the definition and consequence of minor shirk? Like in the Quran, it says that Allah will forgive all sin but shirk. Does that include minor shirk? If you could point me to some resources, I would really appreciate it. I'm seeking a broad perspective, I'm seeking a broad perspective as possible, madhab wise. Well, this is not a madhab issue. This is a purification of the heart issue. Madhahib are about fiqh with regards to rulings of how to do and what to do things and when to do them and how to perform it properly. But generally, the meaning of minor shirk, the Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith that he is the most thing he fears for his ummah is this type of shirk, which is, he describes it as, it's more subtle than a black ant on a black smooth rock in a dark moonless night. That's how subtle it is. Minor shirk is when you start to associate, as we mentioned earlier in another question, with regards to intentions. It's when you start to do things for the sake of people, for the sake of praise of people, for the sake of a position. You do the work, and instead of it being so, for example, as the Prophet ﷺ mentions with regards to people who enter into hellfire, it's actually due to somebody could be saying La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. They are praying, and they are a qari of the Quran. They are a reciter of the Quran, and they lead the prayers in the mosque, and they do it in Taraweeh, and then they enter into hellfire. And the reason is because they did it for the sake of being known as a qari. They just wanted to be known as somebody who's a beautiful reciter of the Quran. So that's a dangerous position to be in. You do things for the sake of, oh, mashallah, this person's really pious. Oh, mashallah, she's really religious and this and that. And that, once you feel pleasure from people saying that, that is actually a sign that you have placed the opinion of people in your heart. The highest position to have is the praise and the ignorance of people of you are equally, awareness and ignorance of people of you, praise and displeasure of people of you with regards to this stuff are equal. You don't care. You don't care that people are saying anything about you. You don't care if they saw you or if they didn't see you. Either way is the same. It's all the same to you in your mind. So that's how you know that you're free from that type of shirk. Most of us, unfortunately, it's something that we struggle with all the time. So the way that to recognize it is to just constantly meditate and reflect on your intentions. Take yourself, as Umar al-Khattab radhiallahu anhu said, "Hasibu qabla an tuhasabu." Take yourselves into account before you are taken into account. So engage in a practice, a daily practice of either in the morning or at nighttime. In the morning, you set your intentions right, and at nighttime, you reflect on your behavior throughout the day and evaluate, did it match up with your intentions to be for the sake of Allah, to be free from this type of, you want to say, hidden idolatry is what minor shirk is. Amr, I've been trying to wake up at dawn and not go back to sleep for the past 2 years and have failed miserably at every turn. I'm a big consumer of sugar products. I absolutely love sweets and thought I would take it one step at a time, so I cut out coffee completely and kept sugar. What's the link, man? Why'd you cut coffee out? Cut the sugar. My aim is to gradually reduce it over time. A question basically, what do you think would be more beneficial to cut out, coffee or sugar? Sugar. I bodybuild and I'm not worried about fat, diabetes, etc. This is purely in regards to spirituality. Sugar will impact you. Even if you look like you're in shape, you can still become a diabetic. Yes, obesity is a risk factor, but having a lot of sugar, the reason you get type 2 diabetes is due to desensitization of receptors from the constant barrage of insulin spikes due to sugar intake. So you don't have to be overweight for that to happen. You could have these spikes of sugar and become a diabetic and still be skinny. My uncle is skinny. He's diabetic. So don't, and he's got a sweet tooth. So for Amr and everybody else, cut sugar out of your life. You literally take more than enough sugar just from the regular food that you eat throughout the day. If you had two pieces of fruit, a bowl of grapes and an apple, that is all the sugar you need in your day. And it's better than having straight up sugar because at least this will be broken down and released gradually. So it's not going to result in the spike of insulin that you would have when you pour it into a drink like tea or coffee. So keep up the coffee, it's fine. Cut out the sugar. And the way that I would do it if I were you, because that's how I cut sugar out in my life, I did it gradually. I used to take, in Canada, the double double, Tim Hortons. So you'd get two sugars and two creams. I cut it out. I just like single, and then just the cream but no sugar, and then cut out the cream, just straight up coffee. So now when I drink coffee, it's just straight up coffee. If I went when I tried to go, and same thing with tea, it was 2 teaspoons of sugar, down to a teaspoon of sugar, down to no sugar. When I tried to go cold turkey at the start, I couldn't keep it up because my taste buds were not used to that. It's too bitter. So I found myself going back to the same old habits. So you have to gradually reduce the intake and do it over a period of time. And the other thing is, if your body is used to that, you'll actually have a withdrawal. You'll have withdrawal symptoms because there's a real addiction to sugar. So just like somebody who's got an addiction to alcohol, you will have addiction to sugar. So you'll need to slowly, gradually get rid of it so that your insulin spikes will start to regulate themselves and become more normalized. So that's on the physical front. This is purely in regards to spirituality. If you could talk more regarding coffee, I would appreciate it. What's your take on it? Cut it out completely. 1 cup in the morning. Where should I put the limit, etc.? How are you able to manage starting your day at 2:30 a.m. in regards to energy level, naps? I have a cup of coffee when I get up in the morning. That's between 2:30 and 3 a.m. And I'll make myself a cup of coffee, and then I'll engage in whatever activities that I need to engage in. And that's really my only cup of coffee throughout the whole day that I have. And with regards to energy levels and stuff, when I'm working, personally, I don't feel tired because I'm working. The only time I feel tired and I feel like I need to nap is when I'm just sitting around doing nothing. So on busy days where I have to go to the hospital, have to go to lectures, tutorials, whatever it is the case may be, I'm out all day, and so I'm running around I'm doing my thing, and then when I get back home, it's usually 5, 6 o'clock, and I only need to be awake until about 9 o'clock, and then I go to sleep. So Isha here for us in Brisbane is about 6:30ish or so. So yeah, after Isha, and then I shut it down. I shut down my phone and everything around 8:30, 9 o'clock, and then I'm completely off the grid until the next morning. After subh, after athkar, after everything, then I turn it back on and then I go. Days where I have to stay home and let's say do some work or whatever, that's not requiring of me to be out and about, or out and about for the Canadians. If I don't have to be out and about, um, I'll just, I might take a nap in the afternoon. The Prophet ﷺ recommended that it said that you should take a nap because shaitan is one that doesn't sleep. So in those cases, I'll take a short nap. And it depends, it could be 20, 25 minutes. I set my alarm up and I don't sleep in a comfortable position so that I don't really drag it on because if I go to bed, it's going to be a 2 hour nap. It's no longer a nap. So usually I'll just actually lay on the floor. It's hard, it's not comfortable, but if I'm tired enough and I can go to sleep, I'll set my alarm up and I'll just sleep on the floor. No pillow, no nothing, just sleep on my back. And subhanallah, when that alarm goes off, I'm up and I'm energized because I wasn't falling into that deep state of sleep. With regards to coffee, you don't have to cut coffee off unless it's a bad addiction that is hindering your life. Just do a cup in the morning. You can do a cup in the afternoon if you need to. There are times in the day where it's more beneficial to have coffee than other times. I believe The best time to have coffee is actually usually around that lunchtime hour, because that's when your cortisol levels and your energy levels go down. And so that's the time when you can bring them up with coffee. Starting with coffee at 8 o'clock in the morning, that's when your cortisol levels are at their highest. And it's not recommended for you to have it then because that's actually going to blunt them. So it's better for you to have the coffee more in the afternoon. Um, but it's fine. Coffee is great. Some people have memorized the Quran using coffee. I mean, it's the thing that supports people to do the Qiyamul Layl. So, praying at nighttime. It's the sugar that's a problem, Amr. Get rid of the sugar. Anthony Valdez. I'm trying to incorporate the concept of tayyib into my life. And thanks to you, I've started with the food I eat. I've started to reduce my meat intake, but I'm starting to think about everything else that's not meat. You've talked about the meat industry and the issues with factory farming of animals, but what about the agriculture industry? The environmental impacts, but also the human components, since there is sometimes accusations of people being exploited. How can I peacefully enjoy my genetically modified and pesticide-infused food without having to become a farmer or grow my own food? Um, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, Anthony. Allah does not burden a soul with more than it can contain and more than it can handle. I highly recommend that you just take it easy on yourself when it comes to this stuff. There's only so much that you can do. Shop organic as much as possible. Try to find things from local farmers. I mean, here in Brisbane, there's a farmers market that starts up that opens up every Saturday. You can support your local farmers who are not big, massive corporations using all of these exploitative practices. Now, when we talk about the impact, I need to clarify something. It's not the impact that we have a problem with. Everything we do is going to have an impact on the environment. The question that we should ask ourselves is, does this impact upset the balance of the environment? And if it does, then you need to mitigate that impact to whatever degree that you can. So the meat industry, for example, the amount of meat that we eat, it's not a problem that it has an impact on the environment. It's the amount that we consume that has a negative impact that upsets the balance to a great degree. And so if you follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and maybe limit your meat consumption strictly to whenever you're invited to people's homes, or if you go do it on your own maybe once every 3 months, then you will actually find yourself being more in balance with the environment than the current practices that we have today of having meat at breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day. The agriculture industry, yeah, it's going to have an impact, but try to, do what you can from your own side. You're not responsible for the overall impact. You're responsible for your own part. Our problem is that we always think big and we think about the overall and we ignore our own contribution. And we belittle our own contribution, and then we think that, oh, there's nothing much that I can do, so I'll just continue doing it. Well, everybody else is saying the same thing. But if each one of us decided to limit our consumption and to limit our negative impact and try to live a balanced life, overall, everything will come into balance. So if you find people being exploited, then look, there are apps, there are resources online that tell you which companies are exploitative, that tell you which companies are fair trade. So look for companies that are fair trade, support local farmers. If you live in a situation, in a context where you have a house and you have the environment and the weather and whatever, or access to some sort of way for you to plant your own and grow your own food, then try to do that. It will give you a new appreciation even for the food that you put on the table, because you're the one who was responsible for planting it and bringing it into fruition. So, and it will give you a better connection with nature if you can do that. But otherwise, do what you can, but without going too far overboard into becoming, what's the word that it's not obsessed, but paranoid. Don't become paranoid about it. Finally, Asma. Salams, hope you're well. Oh, Asma, Mizan Avenue. Shout out to Mizan Avenue in Sydney. I have a question, nothing urgent, but sometimes I struggle to answer. I understand we have to accept where Allah has placed us, whether it is at a larger scale in the world's political arena or in our own personal lives. But when do we know it's time to act? For example, asking a woman who is suffering in domestic violence, or in the foster care system, someone being persecuted, or someone who is homeless and doesn't have much to look forward to. Advising someone to stay patient throughout doesn't feel right. When do we know the time is right to move from being a passive spectator who accepts a life of mediocrity to actually pushing your limits because you are unsatisfied with your current state and breaking beyond your boundaries. Would wanting to achieve something more in life mean you're not grateful for the position Allah has placed you in? One of my fears is that I will be asked why I didn't try to do more for people who are suffering than what little I do now, or why I endured suffering in my own life, and not to try to change my circumstances using this as an excuse. I'm simply accepting where Allah has placed me. In some ways, it feels a little defeatist. It's a good question. Rida, so the state of, and this is the final question, by the way, for those who have just felt that this has gone way too long. The Rida, so this is, Rida is a concept in Tasawwuf, which is, or in Islamic spirituality in general. It is the position of having a content acceptance of Allah's decree and the position that Allah has put you in. That is in the heart. That I am satisfied, I'm happy with whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done for me and has placed me in. Now, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually teaches you how to go about doing this in a very beautiful way. And the story, for those of you who haven't read the seerah, go look up the story of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's visit to Ta'if. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam spent all of his time trying with the people of Quraysh in Mecca. And after he was rejected by just about everybody and prosecuted and or persecuted and really rejected by them, he went to Ta'if and he tried, and he literally walked, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, he walked to Ta'if and he called them to Islam over there. And the way they treated him was so disturbing. They even had the sufaha and the children, they had the foolish people and the children throw stones at him as he left, as he was leaving Ta'if, because they just rejected him and kicked him out basically. Now he sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam raised his hands to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in dua. Jibreel came and he, in response to the dua, and he said, here's the angel of the mountains. If you want, we'll just collapse these two mountains on them. And he sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam said, no, maybe some Muslims will come out of, people who believe in Allah and His Messenger will come out of their progeny. But what was the dua that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said? In it, he says that, to who are you leaving me, O Allah? To a stranger who is going to harm me, leaving me to people who are not going to listen to me. Now, if as long as you are happy with me, I don't care. If the whole world rejects me, as long as you are happy with me, it doesn't matter. And so, if you look at his external behavior, he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was taking on the means. He was trying, he was performing his task, he was performing his duty as a messenger. He was going and telling the people. He was walking all the way to Ta'if and walking back. He was getting harmed in the process. He was getting abused in the process. But yet he still continued. And the end result of his continuation over a 23-year period is to finally get what? Yawm al-Fath. Finally, Mecca surrenders to him. And he conquers basically the world, and look at where we're at today. You know, with Islam and how far and wide it spread and the achievement. It's amazing. He sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the things that he managed to do in a very short amount of time, despite all of the suffering and the struggles. Yet, his state of being, as he was doing these things, was a state of rida. It was a state of acceptance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree. In other words, it is upon you to strive, but it is not upon you to arrive. You are tasked with doing the work. If you are in a situation that you are not happy with because it is an abusive situation, it is an unjust situation, if you're observing somebody who is going through an oppression, it's a dual kind of state of being to be in. The essential state is a state of rida. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done and has put me in, and this is the situation I'm in, and I'm being tested, and this is the tribulation. And so I show patience in that sense, internally. Externally, on the other hand, I seek out the means. I do the work to improve my circumstances. I do the work to remove this oppression. That is the other part of the test. So you're actually getting two types of tribulations when you are going through this test. The first one is, what is your internal essential response going to be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's the first test. And the second test is, what is going to be your response to your external environment? Are you going to engage in an act of oppression as well in response to it? Are you going to become an ignorant person in response to the ignorance that is being done onto you? Or are you going to act in the best, most ideal way, with wisdom, with excellence, with patience, with whatever is going on in front of you? So doing that is not indicative of you not being happy, not being accepted. In a state of acceptance, you could be unhappy, but you could still be in a state of acceptance. As long as you remind yourself and keep your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and recognize that ultimately your relationship in this world is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not with the people. It is not with anything in this dunya. It's not with anything in this world. And your attachment of your heart should be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not with things in this world. And yeah, you do the work, you do what you need to do, and the test is Allah is presenting you with oppression. Your test is, what are you going to do with that oppression? You're going to take on the means to try to remove that oppression as best as you can. And until you do, you're in a state of acceptance. You're happy. And you need to recognize, when you are not in a state of acceptance over your current circumstance, it makes it less likely for that circumstance to be removed. وَلَئِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَئِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that if you are thankful, I will increase you. So you have to be thankful, and you have to recognize there is no circumstance that you're in, there is no situation, no difficulties that you're going through, except that it has some deep gems and lessons within it. And your task is, aside from being in a state of acceptance, is to find those gems and those lessons that you're supposed to learn from these things. Gold is purified by fire, by heat, by extreme heat. So if you're going through a type of tribulation, a type of an oppression, while you're working to removing that tribulation, that oppression from yourself, you're in an internal state of peace with your Lord, and you're seeking the lessons that you're supposed to be deriving from it. Because nothing happens in this world out of order. It's all with purpose. I hope that answers your question, Asma. And I think I'll conclude with that question. There were many questions other than those. I'm saving them for, inshallah, if Allah grants us life, for episode 70. If Allah grants us the opportunity to do that for part 5. If you guys have any more questions or clarifications or confusions or things about these things that we talked about, or other issues, feel free to send me a message over Facebook. As usual, if I don't respond, it's not because I'm ignoring you. It's just sometimes your questions are so good that I need to include them in a podcast episode. Or if not, they require a very lengthy response that I just may not have the time immediately to do so. So some of you have received responses often, maybe 2 months later. Better late than never, I guess, in those cases. But I do get them, I do read them, I do pay attention to them. Before I let you go, please, 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 if you haven't done so, go and rate this podcast on iTunes. Give it a 5-star rating. Write a comment review. It is the way that these things climb up the ranks, as I constantly tell you guys. This is how this spreads. If you want this content to spread, if you feel there is benefit from it and people should know about it, the way that you can help that is by rating it, writing a comment in iTunes, and also by sharing it on your social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Tumblr, or whatever it is that you use. Share it with email and word of mouth, letting people know about it so they can download it on their podcast. That's how you can help spread this work. If you'd like to become a supporter of this work as well, you can do so financially through patreon.com/Muhammad Gilan. The links are all in the description. Final thing, we're in the works of, for those of you who are going to be in Sydney soon, I can't remember the specific dates. I want to say like August 12th or something like that. There is going to be with Mizan Avenue sessions there that I'm going to be doing, covering Al-Munfarija, Imam ibn Nahwi's poem, The Reliever. Those of you who checked on my YouTube channel, I was planning to do a 5-part series on it. I managed to do 4. The 5th one, it never materialized. But alhamdulillah, now we're going to do the whole poem, The Reliever, with Mizan Avenue in Sydney. So check out their Facebook page, check out their announcements for the specific dates and times that this is going to happen. And there's also a retreat that is in the works that is going to take place, I want to say October 29th till September 2nd, that I'm going to be there as well, inshallah, with the Mizan Avenue team. More to come. I will let you guys know as they get closer to the date. I'll be announcing that over Facebook and Twitter, inshallah. With that, I pray you have a blessed week. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.